I'm not condoning anybody fabricating any part of their background, but Black people are almost never given the space or the grace to make mistakes, to fabricate things, to fib or to lie or to exaggerate. We're always under more of a microscope than our counterparts. And if we make a mistake, if we say something that is not perfect, right, even when we embody Black excellence, we are crucified much more than anybody else. Hey y'all, Janice on the mic. My name is Janice Arday. I am a PhD trained organizational psychologist. I talk about current events. I usually try to loop in how current events relate to equity and inclusion and the workplace and, you know, the Black community and the Black experience. So that is just a little bit about me. I wanted to talk about Jason Arday and his tragic passing, or his tragic death, unaliving, I should say rather. As somebody who, as a Black woman who's worked in the ivory tower, I've been working in academia for over a decade now. I just wanted to speak to my experiences and talk to the larger issue of what Jason Arday's story exposes. Normally when I make YouTube videos, I have like a set of bullet points that I will glance at so that I stay on track, because I can be verbose and long-winded. With this one, I just wanted to just talk from the heart without any sort of bullet points or script and just talk about how I'm feeling. So I was familiar with Jason Arday because I am a co-host of a podcast called The Academic Boardroom, and I'll link to it above. But me and my close friend, Dr. Eli, started an academic podcast. We interview people about their journeys, but we talk more about their academic and educational journeys and what it took for them to get to where they are currently. And it was Dr. E's idea to do the podcast, and we're both in academia, and we've both been working in academia for a while in several different institutions across the tri-state. And I've been writing about academia and how academia is not a friendly place, is not always a friendly place to Black people for years now. I'll leave some of my articles in the description box below. But what I've noticed, and again, this is my experience, but there's a lot of research and data to back up what I've experienced. And essentially, what I've experienced is that at predominantly white institutions, or PWIs, especially when you're the only, so the first Black person and the first Black woman in your department, or the only Black person in your department, it can be so isolating and difficult. At all of the predominantly white institutions that I've worked in across New York and Connecticut, I find that I'm often the only Black woman or Black person in the department. And just for more context, I have my PhD and in organizational psychology. So a lot of the teaching that I've done is either in psychology schools. So every university, or most universities, have like a psychology department. So a lot of the teaching I've done has either been in the psychology department or in the business school. And what I find across industries and fields is that when at PWIs, especially when I'm the only, it has definitely been an isolating experience. Part of the reason why I left my previous institution that I worked at in New England is because, you know, I experienced a lot of subtle forms of, I got mad gas today, subtle forms of exclusion, right? And microaggressions. And it got to a point where I just felt like I wasn't able to really thrive in that environment. And that, coupled with the fact that my consulting business had really been doing well, and I had been partnering with a lot of organizations and institutions to help them with DEI, those were the two main reasons why I decided to leave the institution I was working at full-time in 2022. And seeing what's happened now with this sort of anti-DEI movement that has grown in strength and has grown in quantity over the last several years reinforced my decision about why that particular institution and a lot of PWIs are just not places for Black people, right? Jason Arday's story, I'm sure many of you have heard about him, but if you haven't, he was a professor that was the youngest Black professor at the University of Cambridge in England. And it's a very prestigious university. When he got hired at the age of 37, he experienced a lot of backlash. There was a particular researcher a white male, who was anti-DEI, who started the smear campaign and was pushing the university to investigate Jason Arday's dissertation and his credentials and his background, because a lot of stuff he felt wasn't adding up. Now, I think two things can be true at the same time. There was definitely a racist smear campaign against Jason Arday. I would argue that British media is much more vicious than American media. I remember what they did to Diana, Princess Diana. And just, I feel like, I don't know, the British press is just vicious. America, we have our issues. We have our paparazzi. We have a lot of like invasion of privacy for celebrities, but like England is like OD. So there was this, for years, there was this like smear campaigns against him, but they intensified in recent weeks because Arday just put out a memoir. And so I think with the memoir, he just was under more of a microscope. He's doing interviews with New York Times and all of these very well-known publications. And I think the anti-Arday voices got louder. And there were all of these articles that came out about him. And let me go back to what I said. So two things can be true. There was a racist smear campaign against him. And also, some of the stuff he talked about, it didn't seem plausible, right? I know one of the things, there was a New York Times article that came out about him maybe 2 weeks ago, prior to his death or his passing, which I don't know if they've done an autopsy, but the police in England said basically they didn't suspect any foul play. So people are suspecting that he unalived himself. But I don't think we've confirmed at the time that I'm recording this what his official cause of unaliving actually was. But, you know, in the New York Times article that came out about him a couple weeks ago, maybe last week or the week before that, he said, like, one of the things he said was like he raised $5 million for like charitable causes. He ran like 30 marathons in 35 days or something wild like that. I've never run a marathon. My sister runs mad marathons, but that just doesn't seem plausible. Excuse me, even for someone who is super healthy. And I don't know, prior to like 2 weeks ago, I did not know who Jason Arday was. And Dr. Eli actually sent me the New York Times article. And I was like, oh, we should try to get him on our podcast. Because to me, when I read the New York Times article, I was like, okay, this is obviously a racist smear campaign. The same thing that they did to Dr. Claudine Gay, who was the first Black president at Harvard. She was the shortest president because they ran her out, and they accused her of plagiarism. With Arday, if you look at his dissertation and the research that he allegedly plagiarized from, it looks pretty clear that there are a lot of similarities that go beyond paraphrasing. With Claudine Gay's research, at the time she published her dissertation, the way that she wrote it wasn't considered plagiarism. So it was just like obviously a targeted campaign against her, right? Even if people don't agree with her research or whatever, it wasn't plagiarism, right? Like plagiarism is arguable, right? And when you publish your dissertation, you're operating under the rules and the laws that are in place at that time, right? So what is considered plagiarism today may not have been something that was technically considered plagiarism 20 years ago or whenever. So with Jason Arday, some of the details of his background, they said seemed to be untrue. I think they spoke with some of the people who grew up with him or knew him, and they said that he was allegedly nonverbal, I believe, until he was 11. And so some people were disputing some of the details of his background. And I think that, I'm not condoning anybody fabricating any part of their background, but Black people are almost never given the space or the grace to make mistakes, to fabricate things, to fib or to lie or to exaggerate. We're always under more of a microscope than our counterparts. And if we make a mistake, if we say something that is not perfect, right, even when we embody Black excellence, we are crucified much more than anybody else. And I think in this case, I don't know the veracity of all of his claims and his details. It seems like some of the things that he shared about his background may have been slight exaggerations. However, there was also a racist smear campaign against him. And Cambridge stood behind him at first and basically said they believed in him, they believed in his work. He was a sociologist, he published and wrote about and studied very powerful things. And Cambridge initially stood behind him, and then I think they started to investigate his dissertation in the weeks leading up to his passing. And last week or a week and a half ago, it was announced that Arday actually decided to step down from Cambridge. And then this past weekend, we heard the news about his unaliving. And so I think that for so many of us, if you're somebody watching who is a Black person who's taught in academia, what Arday experienced is not anything unlike what we've experienced. We just may not have experienced it at this magnitude, right? But you are hyper scrutinized. You know, it's like universities tout you as the first or the only, and they love to say, oh, we have the first or the only or the youngest Black whatever in this department or this field. But yet these institutions do very little in most cases to protect Black faculty, Black professors, or keep us safe. There is very little protection. And so I think that what is important to think about is two things: the role that the media played in Arday's alleged unaliving, the role that the media plays, but more importantly, like the role that these institutions play or could have played, right? What are some things that this institution could have done to protect Arday more, right? I think standing behind, and in all of these instances where you see Black people are either not given tenure, you know, I wrote this article that I will link below, but I talked about Cornel West, right? Not initially getting tenure at Harvard. I talked about Nicole Hannah-Jones, who was denied tenure at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, I believe, UNC, and she ended up going to Howard, where she has a faculty position there, and I believe they granted her tenure there. But we see in a lot of these instances where Black people are initially propped up as these amazing magical Negroes, that the universities and institutions don't necessarily stand behind these Black people and the vitriol that we are receiving when they are under pressure. So there has to be more protection, right? Standing behind, putting out statements that support these individuals holds a lot of weight. If your own institution that hired you, that vetted you or allegedly vetted you is throwing you under the bus, that's more fodder for the public and more ammo for them to say, well, see, even your own institution that hired you is not standing behind you, right? And then there's another conversation also about the hiring practices, right? As somebody whose work centers around equitable hiring, equitable promotion, equitable workplace practices, if he plagiarized as much as people are accusing him of, how was he able to get hired at the university? How are candidates vetted? Did you just want him because of how cool it would make your university to hire this young Black up-and-coming professor? So there is onus on the institution. I feel like more of the onus I would place on the institution than even on the media. The media is going to do what the media is going to do, right? The English media, British media has been vicious for 30 years. It's been 30 years almost. Next year, I believe Princess Diana passed in 97. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been literally almost 30 years since Diana passed. The media has been vicious. I don't expect the media to change because salacious headlines and paparazzi and all that, that's what gets people to read. It pays people's bills. But I put a lot more of the onus, like 90% of the onus, on these institutions to protect Black faculty instead of just touting us as the first and the only. And Dr. Raquel Martin had a really good post on her page a couple of days ago where she was asking the question, if you're a Black faculty member at a university, at a PWI, I believe she asked, she said, what are some things that you would recommend prospective Black faculty ask or look for when they are applying for these institutions? And I think asking questions, talking to other Black faculty members is important. The problem, in a lot of these instances is there's no other Black faculty members to talk to. There's no other Black people to talk to when you are the only, you are the first, right? But just looking more, I would even look into student experiences, because student experiences don't necessarily parallel or aren't always aligned with faculty, but they're similar. If Black students are having a bad experience at a PWI, it's more than likely Black faculty are also going to have negative experiences. So I would definitely seek out people who've worked at that institution, Black people who've worked at that institution or are currently working there. I would look at student experiences, right? I would see if you could even speak to students about their experiences, and it's difficult. And I would look out for red flags and warning signs and ask yourself, if this institution turns out being an institution that is not safe and doesn't protect me, what are the red flags that I know signal a lack of safety to me, right? And so for me, when I work in an institution, I want to know that I am gonna be given the tools that I need to feel supported and to succeed, is one. Number two, if I'm a full-time faculty member, I need to be included. My thoughts and my contributions need to be included in conversations, right? And not just like, okay, we hear you, Janice, but ignoring other things. I need to be an instrumental part of the department. I also need to feel like I'm part of the team, right? That when after work or outside of work activities are being done, that my needs are being considered, right? We are all going golfing, for example, is something that I experienced at an institution I used to work at. And it's like, bro, I don't even golf. Do Black people golf? I know they do. I know somebody's going to come in the comments and be like, I'm Black and I golf, but it's not something that we typically do, like going out for beer or playing golf. And so there are very subtle ways that exclusion often shows up in these institutions. It's not blatant where somebody's saying, I don't like you because you're a Black professor. Even student evals is a big thing where there's tons and tons of research that indicates that student evals are biased, right? Students are just more likely to unconsciously believe that you're less qualified, less knowledgeable when you are a non-white faculty member, especially when you're a non-white woman. And so the fact that in academia and most institutions, so much weight is placed on solely student evaluations. You might have somebody come into your room and evaluate your teaching. You might, the university might look at your scholarship, how many articles you publish, what type of journals they're published in, but a lion's share of the weight of your, whether you should get promoted, whether you are qualified, is how the students evaluate you. But if that is such a biased and it's not always an objective evaluation, why are we putting so much weight on these sorts of things, right? So there's very subtle ways that exclusion shows up, right? In just like the emails, the way that people speak to you. I've had so many instances where I've never in my many, many years of schooling, my bachelor's, my master's, my PhD, I never called my professors by their first name. But throughout my academic career, students, often white students, call me by my first name. And I just think that shows a lack of respect, right? I don't demand that students call me Dr. Janice, but professor, like some sort of qualifier, is important because I'm in this position for a reason. I'm knowledgeable enough to impart knowledge onto you. And I do believe that it's a two-way street. Students teach us as much as we teach them. But I think that there are so many ways that microaggressions show up. So you have to, as a Black faculty member, think about what you're willing to put up with and what your line will be. And if you experience certain things, whether it's something that you will put up with. And there are certain things that I've experienced in my full-time faculty role that caused me to quit in 2022. If it was a welcoming environment and I felt like I could grow and thrive, I would have just stayed there because my consulting business was doing well, but I love to teach. Like, at the end of the day, teaching is where I come from, a teaching family, and teaching is where my heart is. And so I do think that as Black faculty members, we have to think deeply about what environments we want to be in, we're willing to stay in, and what will be our line in the sand. And so I just think, you know, this is just like a stream of consciousness video. I don't have solutions per se, but I do think that it's important to consider or put the onus on institutions, right? Individuals who are marginalized or oppressed under a system shouldn't be the ones that have the onus of changing the system, right? It's the institution's fault, these universities that prop us up as like, hey, look, we have this amazing Black person who's doing this amazing research, but throw us under the bus at the first chance. Don't protect us and allow subtle acts of exclusion to take place without checking them or without accountability or consequences. So those are my thoughts on the whole Jason Arday situation. My heart really goes out to his family. It's just a really tragic and unfortunate situation, but I think that there's many people that feel what he felt, maybe not at the same magnitude and aren't being dragged by all these publications, but it is a very isolating feeling when you're the only Black or one of the few Black people in your university or department. And I do think that there needs to be more protections within these institutions and universities. And as Black people, we have to really ask ourselves whether these are environments that are safe for us and that we should be entering. So those are my thoughts. My name is Janice Masari. I am a PhD trained organizational psychologist. I talk about current events. I usually try to loop in how current events relate to equity and inclusion and the workplace and, you know, the Black community and the Black experience. So that is just a little bit about me. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I will check y'all out in the next video.